Councillor Blatz,
I move that we come out of camera.
moved by Councillor Blatz. Those in favor? Carried unanimous. Lee, new motion.
Move that City Council directs administration to forward the redacted report to the complainant.
Moved by Councillor Billingsley. Any discussion? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried unanimously. (16A) city-owned building lease policy. Welcome, Natasha.
There we go. All right, good morning, Mayor Gandam and members of council. In front of you today is the city-owned building lease policy, which has previously been brought to council on May 10th and June 14th of last year, as well as January 10th of this year. So the purpose of the policy is to provide direction on how lease agreements are managed in city-owned buildings and to ensure the agreements are consistent and equitable among the groups. So today administration has prepared 3 options for council to consider. Option 1 is the market rate approach, which is the policy council has reviewed at previous meetings, uses the appraised market value as a benchmark for lease rates. Attachment 2 shows the impact to current lease agreements based on varying percentages of subsidization. Administration is seeking direction from council on the rate of subsidization, if any, to be provided to the groups who lease space in city-owned buildings. It should be noted that as per the council motion from January 10th, 2022, administration has obtained appraisal reports for all current lease spaces in the city buildings. Administration is also recommending that the policy be amended so organizations, including for-profit groups that provide recreation, sport, cultural, or community programs for the community, be eligible for the same subsidization rate as not-for-profit groups. Preference would still be given to not-for-profits. However, if there are no suitable not-for-profit groups, a lease agreement could be entered into with a for-profit group. So administration has revised that policy to include the amendment. The second option to consider uses the operational costs of the facilities as a benchmark instead of the appraised market value. So tenants' lease rates would be based on the operational costs of the facility for the square footage that they lease. So attachment 3 outlines the impact to current lease rates using the facility costs as a benchmark. And again, I've included varying percentages of subsidization if council would like to consider any subsidization. And then the third option that council could consider is just to continue having administration negotiate the ad hoc agreements like we've been doing to date. And then the final agreement for each of those would come to council for approval. So I've listed some advantages and disadvantages. So option 1 and 2 are both consistent and they provide council approved subsidization rates if council chooses to subsidize. Some disadvantages. So option 1, which we heard from some different groups, is that the appraised market rate is probably maybe not the best representation of rec facilities. And of course, there is a cost associated with having those appraisal reports completed every 5 years, as stated in the policy. And then option 2, disadvantages due to the facilities only having 1 utility meter. It is difficult to actually gauge the usage for each tenant. And then option 3, the ad hoc negotiations. Advantage is that council has the opportunity to review all the lease agreements. The disadvantages are that it's not consistent among tenants, or it might not be, and then it's time consuming for both administration and council. So I think that concludes everything I wanted to speak about there. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Counselor Elliott.
I don't know if this is a question or not, Natasha, and thank you for doing all this. This took a lot of work and I appreciate that. Some groups are smaller than other groups with membership. So if you take like the gymnastics club, they have 600 plus members. You take the Arts and Crafts Center, they don't have very many members, but we're offering a service to our community, to those different groups, and to have the same rate for everybody may be cost prohibitive, which may cause the organization to have to shut down. And I wouldn't want to see us take away programs from anybody who is accessing them who may not be able to afford them. So that's just a concern that I have. If we put the arts and crafts, that group, if we put their fee to market value, they would probably have to shut down. Whereas the gymnastics club may be able to increase their membership fee by a little bit and they would be able to function. So that's just my thought. Thank you.
I'll get this started. I move that City Council approves the policy titled City-Owned Building Lease Policy attached to the report dated March 28, 2022, using the appraised market value. Where did it go, Karen? It disappeared. Method at 50%.
That's 50 or 15.
50.
Thank you.
And
Go ahead.
I do have concerns about this, though. In the same building, if it's appraised market, why, and I guess my question will be to you. In my opinion, the most valuable place at the triplex is the Arts and Crafts Center. And yet it's deemed to be at $5 a foot in the same building that's ground floor or main floor, whereas the other ones are either up or down, are raised at $10. I look at office space. Does anybody pay $40 to $45 a square foot in Wetaskiwin for office space? Is that accurate?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley. So the appraiser that we had do the report looked at different spaces in Wetaskiwin as well as Ponoka, as well as Drayton Valley and Camrose. As for the arts and crafts space itself, the reason I understand that it's valued less than the other two is that it doesn't have the bays, right? So the curling rink area with the big overhead doors that the gymnastics club and the curling club have in their spaces.
Okay. I guess it should. If we're using it as a benchmark, I'm okay with that. I'm just not convinced that anybody's paying $35 in this community for office space. And I look at what gymnastics, they don't have access to an overhead door. They're half underground. They couldn't even put in an overhead door if they wanted to. Wow. Without a whole lot of expense. So if we just use it as a benchmark for the dollar amount, I'm okay with that. And that's the reason why I went with this motion. I'm still not convinced on the numbers being totally accurate.
But
I guess for me, and no, through the chair to Natasha. So the appraiser based the costs on current costs in Wetaskiwin, Camrose, and where?
I believe the other couple were Ponoka and Drayton Valley.
And I don't know how we would compare to Camrose as an example, as a good comparator rather than the size, but economically speaking, I gotta believe Camrose can get an awful lot more for the property than anybody in Wetaskiwin can get. have no idea about the other communities. So I've got some concerns with the appraised value when you compare it outside of our own community. I have no idea what they charge per square foot for office space in the city of Wetaskiwin, period. No other comparators.
Mr. Mayor, through to Natasha, we subsidize minor hockey and things to the tune of 50%, do we not? Or we did, but I could have old figures.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Elliott, subsidize in terms of their ice rentals.
Yes,
Yeah, we operate at about a 30% cost recovery, so it's
Yeah.
actually more than that.
and it was basically for youth. The adults don't get subsidized the same way, do they?
Correct, the youth pay a lesser amount for ice rentals.
And then we have a different rate for outside users?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm just,
Yeah.
I didn't check into this, but that's the way it was. I'm just making sure, so. And then this is basically what you're proposing here is basically for all the office type space, the majority of it.
Through the chair, yes, that it's the office space and the concession space at the Civic Center.
Right. And the concession is leased to minor hockey and they usually sublease it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Aberlin.
Thank you, Mayor Gandam. Through the chair to council in general, I agree with the assessment value. I think that what's been brought up by councillors Billingsley and Nielsen, I agree. I don't see that being a number coming to what we could get out of that building, if nothing else, versus all of the empty space in town. I'd rather have the building be used and get some cost recovery through it. My other question though was coming down to further subsidization. I can't say the word. Subsidization is there, and I know that this is kind of leading into the third one where it becomes into an ad hoc idea, but where we are looking at smaller groups with less memberships and whether or not they're able to arts and craft, and I'm not favoring them. They also have a large space that aren't using as much of. I would say a curling rink, the whole rink is used, right? The gymnastics, the whole area is used. Are there further subsidizations that could be put into that? Or is that just a kettle of worms we don't want to get into? Maybe the arts and club has to be smaller if they can't afford it. I don't know. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Sorry, I'm not trying to belabor anything, but through the mayor to Natasha. Natasha, since the buildings were built, we've had 1 meter. And many times we've asked what it would cost to put separate meters in so that gymnastics, the curling rink, the arts and crafts center would be monitored separately. Is that, I'm sorry, this is an unfair question. I should have asked you ahead of time, but do you know what the cost approximately would be to put in 1 meter?
Through the chair, I do not. I don't know if Sue might have an idea, but I'm sorry, I do not.
Through the chair to Councillor Elliott, it's nominal, depending on the meter size, it could be $1,000. The problem is going to be for every meter, they get a flat fee. So we're going to unnecessarily increase the charges for each space with the flat fee, and then you'd end up having to waive that. And I think for administration, this is about, we've been running with renewing the existing leases for years, and they were, in our opinion, they were unfairly negotiated in the beginning, and we're just trying to find consistency. I think there's probably an opportunity to look, if you wanted to, at certain pieces, let's say X number is at storage, is storage at a different rate, and we could get to that level. But at this point, it would be beneficial for administration if you could pick a point, even if it was more than 50%, until we could gather some of that data and information, and then we could come back and update this at a later date. But being able to get these lease agreements updated is going to be really important.
I'm now having second thought on my motion, just due to the fact that I do have concerns about this market value. What if they appeal that, and instead of $35 a foot or $10 a square foot, it's $5 a foot, and we're subsidized by 50%. So I'm wondering, I'm okay with the dollar amounts that show under the 50% column. I'm not, my concern is the appraisal. In other words, the result is I'm more than satisfied at that 50%, but it's the math, how we got there, that I have concerns about. And if any, like I say, if anybody appeals that market value, or it changes, because I truly believe they're really high, we could get ourselves into less money. So I don't know. Do this.
Councillor Nielsen?
I looked at this a little bit differently, and I looked at it from the perspective of comparing one against the other. Currently in the triplex, the facility costs to operate it are $124,000. And that comes from the facility cost page. We're currently charging under the market rate. If we charge market rate without any reductions, we'd be asking for $228,000, double what it costs to operate the facility. So at market rate at 50%, we're still at $124,000. That would cover our costs. We're currently getting $63,000 a year out of it from the 3 occupants, which is half of the facility costs. So if we go to market rate and give it 50%, we're still charging them facility costs straight across the board, which is an increase of 200% from what they're currently paying.
Mhm.
So what's being suggested here is a 200% increase to their rents, doubling their rents across the board.
Mhm.
So my question, I guess, to council, is it our goal to recoup all of the facility costs? Because we don't in any other recreational program in this city. And if we're subsidizing all our recreational programs by 50% of the operational costs of our facilities, I'm suggesting that they're already paying that at $63,092. Which puts them exactly on par with what is happening in the rest of our recreational facilities, if we are subsidizing all those facilities at 50%.
Councillor Billingsley?
Made a good argument.
I've never heard that before,
No,
especially at
no.
home.
The only thing is some are not paying for their space currently. Some of the office spaces are free.
And I was speaking only, Bill, of the triplex.
No,
Yeah.
and I'm agreeing.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with
Yeah.
you, but there would be some extra money. I'm adding to what you're saying. There
Yeah.
would even be some extra dollars if those people who have free office space right now even paid $600 a year or whatever.
Nominal fee.
Yes. Thank you.
But in those annual costs, are we then taking into consideration what the replacement cost of the facility is too?
Like an ice plant?
That's, well, I mean, that's an expense, but I mean, the building itself,
I agree.
right? One day, we're gonna need a new arena.
But are we charging right now? What, with the arenas? Ice time? Replacing.
No,
mats
but that's
on-
what I'm saying. You're looking at the operating costs for the year.
Yeah.
Period, and we're
Yeah.
subsidizing 50%. Then are we also looking at replacement costs? The capital costs that are gonna come along with operating those facilities?
I don't disagree with you. But if we're looking at recouping operational costs plus replacement, then are we doing the same with the Manlick swimming pool and our ice arenas when we charge out ice time and admission fees? And I would argue, I don't think we are. Now, then it becomes a cost. If that's something that we want to do, then our arena costs, our rental costs here, and our ice arena costs will need to go up all exponentially.
I wouldn't say exponentially, but I would say that it needs to be a consideration. We're still subsidizing the facility, whether it's the use or the replacement of it. We're not getting full cost recovery on the replacement on the building, just like we're not getting full cost recovery of the annual cost of the facility. Go ahead, Sue.
Just one thing for council to consider too is that when you're looking at the rec facilities in Natasha's area, you have control over what's happening there. And these are all outside groups that you don't necessarily have as much control over. So I don't know if it's fully expected to have the same cost recovery, if that makes sense.
Go ahead.
I guess my question is to administration. As I stated, that I'm okay with the dollar amounts, but I'm having struggles tying it back to the appraised market value. Can you possibly give some suggestions as to how to word a motion that gets the dollar amounts without tying it necessarily to the appraised market value? Because I have grave concerns about that.
Are you looking more at getting, so if we have 50% subsidization of annual operating cost, or whatever that building costs us a year, you want to cover 50% of that?
No, I'm saying I'm okay with charging $5 a square foot to gymnastics and to Witaskin Curling Club and the $2.50 to the art center and 17, like those dollar amounts that are in the column. I'm okay where they're at. I'm just got grave concerns about tying it back into the appraised market value.
But that's what I mean. So if you're going to look at what a facility costs us in a year, tying it to that as opposed to a market value.
Yeah.
And then my other concern then is if the gymnastics club is operating as a for-profit business, are we subsidizing a for-profit business under that same level of subsidization as an arts club or a curling club that is a nonprofit?
In my opinion, I'm okay with subsidizing there. It's a community group that is providing recreational facility for the community. Whether or not the people that own it would be being paid a wage as a well, they wouldn't be volunteers, but you're getting coaches and things like that. I don't know. Obviously, I haven't seen their books, nor am I entitled to see them, so I really can't answer that, but I'm okay at this point charging the same amount.
So then if the dance studio leased a space, leased the civic building, we'd then be subsidizing them at 50% because they're in a city space?
If one of the other ones pulled out and that was what's going on, yeah. I mean, we seem to be doing that with the gym at the pool. I mean, we provide the service at a reduced rate.
Mr. Mayor, do we have the right as council when we are leasing property to see the financial statements of the groups that are in our facility?
I'm not sure. Probably not.
Through the chair to Counselor Elliott, I don't believe we do. It would be, I could look into it though.
No, I don't want you to do. You got enough to look into. Start looking into this too, but
As a, like, so the curling club society would obviously share their financials with their membership. So I would say that that's public information. But that's them operating as a society, not as a business.
I just know that the gymnastics club started out as a community group
Mhm.
and has grown so much. And as Councillor Billingsley said, when you get all these coaches and things and the travel that they're doing, maybe there is some profit involved.
But it's I think the structure of the organization has changed.
Okay,
It's no longer that nonprofit or,
okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know that, so thank you.
go ahead.
Through the chair to all of council, I know that you're grappling with this, and I guess from my perspective, one of the things that council needs to do is have a premise or a foundation that is considered fair and consistent. In this case, you have appraisal values, and I acknowledge that you don't necessarily agree with those appraisal values. However, they were done by a third party, an independent party, and therefore council should have some comfort in the sense that there's no conflict with regards to how those rates were determined. If at the end of the day, you're satisfied with what the rates are with the subsidization, then at least you have a basis of which to argue or support your decision. And that is essentially the third party appraisal value that council had no conflict with. Again, as I said, what is trying to be done here is to come up with a fair and consistent method of allocating out those lease costs to those individual groups.
Mr. Mayor, so if we took Councillor Billingsley's thought on the dollar rate, it could still, so the leases could all be signed for those dollar rates. And then when the lease came back to council for review or to be re-signed, there could be a percentage increase to those rates that they have, those dollar figures, as opposed to market value and everything else. So we could say that I propose a 5% increase to their lease rate now, which is based on the dollar figures that we're looking at in our charts. I know that doesn't make it as concrete as what you're suggesting, Diana, but
Yeah, for me, I would like to see what it costs the city a year to have that space and then decide what we're going to subsidize that rate at. And then whether, if the minor hockey has an office space of X number of square feet, they're taking up so much of the usable space or the billable space, then that would reflect their lease rate. I would like to get away from the individual agreements done with each of the organizations, because then whether it's administration doing it or council doing it, it then becomes political, or it becomes a little bit of a favoritism of, or a personal preference of how that's going to look. And that I'd like to get away from completely. Setting a percentage of this is what we're going to subsidize across the board then makes it fair for everybody and you're not picking and choosing winners and losers out of lease agreements. Councillor Aberley?
Thank you, Mayor Gandon. Does the operating cost include, for example, and again, not picking on anybody, we pay people to make the ice. We pay people to do those things. So is that included in an operating cost of that facility? So the curling rink, I don't know how much, but right, how much of that facility is us putting staff into?
That's what I'd like to see it as. This is how much it costs us each year for that space.
For that space, like it. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I would agree with that myself. I didn't think about that at first, but I think that is fair to everybody across the board. And maybe a little bit more fair to the city to see what the actual costs are and where we're at with each individual group that we have to deal with. But at least it's the same across the board. And then, we've got as Diana had mentioned, we kind of got a basis to go from. And like we say, we all know that you don't really get cost recovery, but we can see maybe exactly where we're at and then go from there.
So that is option 2.
Yeah, those numbers are there. Yeah.
The thing that concerned me about option 2, like I said, I don't know if there is a perfect, because I'm not all that satisfied with option 1. Option 2, unless we want to heavily subsidize gymnastics in the curling club, we're going to bury the arts and crafts center.
But I think you have to take into consideration that the Arts and Crafts Center doesn't have ice and doesn't have that ice plant, right? Like, and you don't have a 30 or 40-foot ceiling that you're heating and or cooling.
But it's not separated, so they will be under the same $5.06 per square as the curling rink, as gymnastics are. And so if you subsidize them by 90%, that's probably more. Okay, maybe that might be high, but even at 70%, that's a slight increase for them, but that's a huge decrease for the other two if we go that way. And if anything less, I would suspect that they're going to have a tough go of things. I don't know if there is a perfect.
But without a meter in there, can you say that the curling space costs this much or the gymnastic club space costs this much as opposed to the arts center that doesn't have the same operating costs that the other two might?
Through the chair. To the chair. No, we can't. And it's not just the meter, it's the heat, it's, the air conditioning in the summer, it's everything. So there are a number of different variables. This was done, I guess the only fairest way we could think was by square footage with this option. And it does have all the maintenance equipment, staffing, all the costs included.
Yeah, because the curling or the arts center doesn't have the same costs associated that the curling club.
Right. Now, I mean, the other option, I guess, is like we had talked about earlier, we could look at breaking out storage space versus actual usable space and potentially come up with a different rate for that. But then we'd have to look at all of the spaces again.
Can we contract Barb's husband back? To
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, the curling rink is only in there for half a year or so many months, but they would be paying as if it was full time. Would they be paying a 12-month fee?
what were we doing currently? They were on a 6-month.
To the chair for their actual, like the curling rink space. Yes, they only lease that for 6 months, but they did continue to lease certain areas for storage and stuff because they don't move all of their stuff out.
And they do pay their own ice maker.
That's correct. So our staff don't put any ice in. We just turn on the plant and they have their own ice technician who does that work.
So through to Natasha, who does the cleaning of the craft center and the lobby area, the upstairs part of the multiplex?
Through the chair to Councillor Elliott. I know previously our staff had been doing that cleaning, and then we are revisiting that now because it is a lease space. So those groups should be cleaning their own respective spaces, and we should just be doing the lobby and the washrooms that everyone can use.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. The only other thing about costs of utilities is Councilor Nielsen probably knows better than I. But when they turn the kilns on, there's a rapid surge of power that is just for that period of time, but it's a rapid surge of and use of power, correct?
Yeah, as far as I know, most of the pottery kilns are on 120. My glass kilns on 220.
Thank you.
Okay.
I guess my suggestion, comment to council is if you end up doing option 2, could you then not possibly take a look at doing grant and aid as a possibility to reduce? Like, I have grave concerns about the Arts and Crafts Center because I'm going to guess that the curling club uses far more utilities than they do, or gymnastics. And as well, we have a whole lot more ongoing costs with running an ice plant than we do turning on the lights at the arts and crafts. But how you separate that, good luck. And I'm just wondering if a grant and aids solution to still leave it at, let's say, $5.06, and then you come back and say, okay, we can reduce you by $10,000, whatever that amount is, would help. I don't know. Like,
I think that we run the risk of that becoming political.
I know.
Council Billingsley supports it this year, but next year we've got a tighter budget.
Sure.
And now all of a sudden we don't support that, and they don't have that ability to budget their own costs for the year. If this year they're going to get that subsidy, but next year they're not through that grant and aid, how are they able to manage that?
Thank you. Through the chair to either Sue or Natasha, how often are the leases renewed?
Through the chair to Councillor Aberlay, the leases that were in place were for 3 years, but they have all passed expiration, or the majority. So we've been putting extensions in place.
Yeah. So then that just brings to the other question of if we are looking into, because I agree with Mayor Gandam about that year to year. So if we were to go across where our subsidy is 50%, but is that, and I know it's really adding into that ad hoc, but for exceptional circumstances or things like that, that we can add additional subsidies or something that is agreeable for 3 years. Because again, I'm just having problems wrapping my head around the way it looks is doubling one tenant's rent. So I understand on paper it looks even, but the reality is nobody else's rent is being doubled. And that's what's hard for me at this point. maybe not quite double, but for an arts major, that was really close.
Through the chair to all of council, I believe, and Natasha can correct me if I'm wrong, at one of the previous presentations, we did talk about phasing in the increases. So that could be helpful in some areas and then, of course, give council more time to consider some of these other options.
Mr. Chair, could there be a fluctuating subsidy? So that it's, one gets 40% and the other gets 70%? And, or is that considered political as well?
Yes, yeah.
Essentially, that's what's
I'm
happening. now.
basing it on numbers of attendees at some of the programs. If you have 600 people, 600 participants in gymnastics, the cost per person is not very much, but if you have 50 people at the craft center, the cost per person is quite high. So I'm just thinking out loud.
Mhm.
I think we need some more time to think about this. I will move to table my motion. Sorry.
That's okay.
Just looking for a little bit. Is there something more we can do? Like we've brought this in front of council 3
I
times.
know.
And we're currently subsidizing at different rates, which has been identified as unfair. Some of them have been going on 3 years now with lease extensions, waiting for us to get this done.
Tabling motion on the floor. There won't be any further discussion. Those in favor? Opposed? Defeated. We'll continue talking about this.
So the motion remains on the floor.
Right, yeah. Councilor Billingsley?
So Natasha, these will be, if this passes, and will the tenants then be signed to a 3-5-year lease based upon that amount or that appraisal?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley, yes, administration would be recommending 3-year agreements just so that we're not having to revisit these yearly. And then in the policy, it states that inflation could be added in for that as well.
And would there be anything in the agreement as far as appealing the appraised market value by the tenants?
There isn't currently, in the policy, there is, I believe, clause J says the council can make exceptions, but that's all.
Thank you.
I know there would be an additional cost to have different meters in different spaces. But I think that if we're going to be able to fairly divide the operating cost of each space, I think that that would be one of the only ways to do that. And then you're still subsidizing each of the groups at the same number, but they're paying for what their space costs them. And I don't know what an additional charge would be for each meter to be able to do that, but can't be tens of thousands of dollars, I assume.
Through the chair, it could be depending on how far we go, because if we're looking at heating costs as well, we would need separate furnaces, separate gas meters. separate water meters.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if this motion is passed, we could also have a proviso that it be phased in over 3 years. The cost could be phased in.
You can make whatever motion you'd like, sir.
I would like to make an amendment to the motion, or just add to, yeah, I guess it's an amendment, that the cost be phased. You're trying to confuse me, Karen. That's okay. With the addition at a subsidized rate of 50%. That's up there already. Phased in over 3 years. I move that. Okay,
If their costs are going up, say their costs went up $3,000. So if it was over 3 years, it would be 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, just divided us, not necessarily a percentage wise of the subsidization.
to include it being divided equally over a 3-year period. That the increase be divided equally over a 3-year period. Like, I'm messing you now, Karen? Is equally divided or divided equally. Grammarians can correct me. Over a 3-year period. I guess it would be over the period of the lease, wouldn't it? Because we're signing a 3-year lease. Over the period of the lease, yes. The period of the lease.
Amendment by Councillor Elliott. Any discussion? Councillor Nielsen.
So that would take the curling rink from a rental rate of $21,600 to $57,000, an increase of $36,000, an increase of $12,000 per year for the next 3 years. It takes precision gymnastics from $37,000 to $47,000, so an increase of $10,000 or about $3,500 per year for each of 3 years. And it would take the art center from $4,300 to $9,200, an increase of $5,000 or approximately $1,600 per year. And if you're signing a 3-year lease, if I'm the curling club and that's going to be $12,000 a year times 3 years, and you're signing me to a 3-year lease, I know at the end of the year, I'm still paying you $57,000. And I don't know, are we expecting that they're going to sign a lease and be committed to that? Which takes the curling club rental up over double. Precision gymnastics up about 30%.
I was looking at the blue under option 2, and it says the curling club I thought was paying $58,000. And then the subsidy at 50% makes it 29.
The motion on the floor is option 1.
Oh. Okay. I was looking at total dollar
Yeah.
figures in option 2,
Yeah.
which seemed reasonable to me.
We're under, yeah, we're under market value, not operating. For the motion. it's
So I would be
subsidization.
speaking against this motion.
So will I. I know I did. But I was looking at the figures from option 2, and that makes more sense to me.
You can rescind your amendment and then we can speak to the motion on the floor. And if you want to change from the market value to the operating costs, that then can be the discussion.
Then that would be changing from option 1 to option 2.
So that's what you want to do, right?
Yes, but then we already have the motion on the floor.
Correct. So we can.
So I'll rescind my
Yeah,
amendment.
there you go. You can speak against the motion on the floor. We can call a vote. There can be a for or against, and then we can carry on whether it was passed or not. Anything further to the motion on the floor? Go ahead.
Like the one without the amendment?
Sorry?
The one without the
Correct,
amendment?
yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would be speaking against option 1 as well, just because thinking about how much utilities have increased this year, and they're already saying that there's no way that they're going to go down. In fact, they potentially are going to continue to go up over the next year. Looking at cost recovery for gas and power for the next bit is going to be kind of key as well for affordability with this building. So just wanted to add that in there.
Councilor Billingsley.
Sorry, your statement was cost recovery by the city or by the user?
By the city, just because for option 2, it's the facility operational costs that we're looking at.
Mhm.
And so just making sure that, because what we're looking at in this chart is 2019 rates. And so this isn't even what the building has been costing us in the past 3 years.
So it is entirely possible, if that's the case, speaking to Councillor Nielsen, that if it's true that utilities go through the roof, that because it's cost recovery, their lease rates could go dramatically up.
But it would be based on these numbers
Actual,
now.
and I get that.
And in 3 years, we would have new numbers to
Correct.
re-sign a lease.
Yep.
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 Anything further? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Opposed? Defeated. Somebody like to make the motion for a new option?
I would move that the city council direct administration to finalize the policy titled City-Owned Building Lease Policy attached to the report dated March 28, 2022, using the total operational cost method at a subsidization rate of 50% and return to council by April 25th, 2022 for final approval of the policy.
Moved by Councillor Elliott. Go ahead.
Based on that motion, correct me if I'm wrong, but Precision Gymnastics, who are currently paying $36,000, they'd be subsidized at 50% of 47. So their rent will go down by 13,000.
Mhm.
curling clubs would go up by 7, and the art centers would go up by 5. So Precision Gymnastics would gladly sign this lease. Well, I'm using the numbers here, Bill, the blue column
Yes.
at 47,000 for the Precision
It's
Gymnastics.
like, I got to make sure I'm under the right option this time.
Are we on the same page there?
Okay,
So Precision Gymnastics would be at 47,000, and then you're saying subsidize it at 50%.
Oh. Oops, that's Karen's on my own screen.
So 50% of 47 would be 24 grand, and they're currently playing 36. So theirs would go down 12,000. And the other two leases would go up.
So if we said nonprofits at 60% and for-profits at 30%.
My only issue with that, because I actually do agree with subsidizing nonprofits and for-profits differently, because I think that is fair. The problem with doing the for-profit organization at 30% is they're still paying less than what they're doing right now. So that's $3,000 less. So we would have to subsidize them at 20% in order for them to be paying more still.
Through the chair to Natasha or Sue, is there, I mean, I understand why we'd enter into a 3-year lease if possible, but obviously we can spend the next 2 days on this and not get agreement around this table. It wouldn't surprise me that most of these groups would expect to see an increase in their rent based on all the conversations that have taken place over the last couple of years. Is there a way we can simply add a percentage increase to the existing rents and sign a 1-year lease? We've had conversations about, are the cost per square foot accurate? Are we comparing ourselves to communities that are way more expensive to operate in than our own? We've talked about the problems in terms of determining subsidization rates, and some are subsidized 100%. And it would give us an opportunity to really wrestle this to the ground without trying to make an ill-informed decision today. I'm looking, I voted against tabling the motion because I think we got to come up with something tangible for now. But I don't see realistically a solution today. I really don't. That's going to be a 3-year lease that's going to satisfy a majority of councillors around the table. We already found motion number 2 actually gives us a greater subsidy to one organization. Well, that's not what we were trying to accomplish with it. So I'm looking for some middle ground, increase some rents, 1-year lease, and then let's take the year to really do justice to this topic. And I'd appreciate a response back.
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, we can continue with the ad hoc. We can add percentages, whatever council wants. But the issue we're going to run into is that they're going to pick apart any consultant we bring in. So we paid someone to come in and look at this. We have looked at that policy or that report twice now and developed a policy on that. So what's going to change? Are they going to want us to go to different communities? What community is going to compare appropriately? We try to stick to the same comparators, the similar like size. We do many comparisons and we've used those same communities. So I don't know that we're going to be able to, other than hiring another firm to come in and either validate this or not, that we're going to be able to satisfy any of the user groups. I do think that it's fair to set different rates for profit and nonprofit if council wants to do that divide on top of what we've presented.
And that's all fair. And based on that, I can't support the motion when I see rents going up everywhere and then the for-profit actually getting a rent reduction.
Councillor Blatz's point, if we have a different subsidization for profit to non-profit, I would support that as well. And we can have all the facts and figures and statistics and analysis and comparisons from all the communities. And as long as they suit what we're trying to do, then we fully expect it and accept it. But as soon as they don't, well, then we don't want to look at the comparators. And I think that if we're going to have comparisons, there's no point in doing it if they're not giving us the information that we're looking for. And that's part of the problem, is that they're always good when they're telling us what we want to know, but they're not, and we question it as soon as it doesn't. So I would support the option 2 with the caveat in there that for-profits are subsidized differently than nonprofits. Councilor Blatz.
Can I make an amendment to the motion so that then it has the 2 different subsidization rates? Okay. Using the total operational cost method at a subsidization rate for nonprofits of 60%. And subsidization rate of 20% for profits.
As amended by Councillor Blatz. Any discussion on that? Councillor Billingsley.
How did you come to 60?
I was looking at the numbers for how much, because for the Arts and Crafts Center, if we did it at the full amount, it would be 18,000 would be what they would be paying annually, whereas they pay $4,300 annually right now. So they would have a blow there. Even with it being at 60%, they'd still be paying $3,000 more. And the curling club would be paying $2,000 more. And to me, I think that that is, it's still an increase, but it's a more fair increase than what 50% would give them. I'm open to any sort of suggestions for an amendment to that.
And it goes beyond just those 3 organizations.
Mhm.
So the concession then, that is a for-profit organization that is sublet, is now going to pay $1,400 instead of $5,000 because it's for-profit.
Right, but the concession would be at that 20%, not the 60%.
Even though it's leased by a nonprofit.
I think the space itself is for profit, regardless of who rents it.
I'll buy that.
So does that mean the concession rent is going from $5,000 annually to $1,700 then?
Nope, to 2837.
How do you arrive at 2837?
That's 20% of the subsidization.
Oh, okay, because it's profit. Gotcha.
Based on this, we would be bringing in about $67,000. What are we bringing in now? Five, 10, 46. So we're bringing in about $5,000 less. Doesn't sound like very good cost recovery, if you ask me.
I'm happier that it's consistent, that it's not somebody getting the good guy deal or the good girl deal as opposed to somebody else who might not have the best relationship with administration that provided the agreement before.
But if we're looking at being good stewards of the taxpayers' money, and we're looking at different avenues of trying to have a balanced budget, I think that we're leaving dollars on the table, and I can't support the rents going down when we really looked at what's fair.
And to me, what's fair is that we're consistent.
Well, if you're looking for consistency, why not make it 30% across the board? Or 90% across the board? That's consistent.
It's not if you're dealing with profits and
Okay.
nonprofits.
So then why 60% and not 90? That's have 90% for nonprofit and 0 for nonprofit. That's consistent too.
Right, but I'm okay with these rates as the consistency.
The motion on the floor reads, what percentage, Karen, please?
So that's nonprofits of 60% and for-profits at 20%.
So, Mr. Chair, is this for 3 years that they would pay the same price for 3 years? Is that the intent
Right, as it's written, yes.
without any inflation costs? So then if we're behind right now, in 3 years, we're going to be really,
Does it go up annually with inflation?
Through, or to the chair, inflation is included in the policy. So there would be that yearly adjustment as well.
okay. Thank you.
And when you speak of inflation, but these are so in other words, let's say utility bills go up 40%.
Mhm.
Would their rent, that portion of their rent increase 40% every year that went on, or is that just inflation that changes their rent?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley. Yeah, and that was one of the disadvantages of using that rate because utility rates are set to skyrocket. So is it going to be sustainable for the groups to pay that inflation?
So,
It's-
so it's not based on CPI, it's based on the actual, what it costs to. So when you say inflation,
Yeah.
it's not CPI.
The way the policy is written now, more of the appraised market, it was CPI using that as the inflation, not view utilities increase.
Anything further to the amendment? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Oh, man.
Okay. Back to the original motion. Any further discussion?
Can we just do a calculation here?
Sure.
So I'm gonna need your help, Diana, I think. So Curly is paying 21,628. What's being suggested is 40% of 58,375. Would that be accurate? We're subsidizing at 60%.
The graph, the option 2 graph is there to show you what 60% is. So they're at 23,350.05.
So with this motion as it sits then, curling goes up $2,000.
Just under, yeah.
Arts and crafts goes up 7,000.
Nope,
No.
Why not?
goes up just under 4,000.
37, sorry. And precision gymnastics goes down
Goes up
also.
from 36,912 to 38,285.
36 to 38.
So how often will the leasees of these facilities, how often will their rent be adjusted based on utilities and actual costs of the facility?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley, I believe the policy said annual increases for inflation.
So so it's actual inflation or actual costs of the facility? Because in here, we're talking costs of the facility, you're talking inflation, which may not necessarily be the same thing.
Right, so depending on which one we went with, we would redo our market assessment, but if we're going with the square footage, then we would review our costs and then reallocate every third year for the new agreements, and then it would go up for CPI. I believe in the bylaws, we have CPI from August to August is what we use, I think, for inflation. So that would be the number used.
But CPI isn't addressing the costs,
No, but every third year we would be reviewing those costs.
but
With
so
the
what
new agreement.
happens? Year one, it's flat, but year two, it jumps up by 100%. I'm over exaggerating, but to 100%. But then in year three, it's back down to zero. Then what happens? No increase? But yet for that 1 year, you had a 100% increase in utilities, but by the end of year three, your CPI is back flat. What happens then?
CPI or the actual cost?
So in other words, we had 1 year in the middle with huge increase in costs,
Right, but it,
but at the end, it's at zero.
but if we're going by what it costs us to operate the building, so if it was 0, 100% and then no increase, we're still at 100% increase from where we were when we initially signed that lease agreement. So when we re-sign the lease agreement, we're still 100% higher than what we were when we initially signed that agreement, right? Unless it went up 100% and then went down 100%, that cost is still going to be up.
I'm wondering if we don't need to do more of a triple net type of lease agreement where the actual costs of the utilities are built into the rent.
I think it's going to be, excuse me, through the chair to council. It's dependent on how your lease agreement is worded. So for example, you may want to word your lease agreement to say that reviewed or adjusted annually based on actuals. And if you have that built into your lease agreement, then you have the flexibility to take your actual costs that will have varied, going up or down. And then for the next year, you would adjust based on actual costs and whatever the percentage of the square footage, as well as whatever percentage council has subsidized.
That makes sense.
Councilor Aberley?
Thank you, Mayor Gandon. Through the chair to anybody that can answer my question. Is there room for additional subsidization and or support for groups? Should they, for example, come forward to council and say that they're incapable of paying said rent? Is that a possibility?
It's always a possibility.
Everything's possible. Okay, thank you.
It
I'm
just
still
then
percolating.
It just then becomes a political issue then, right?
Yeah.
And you're then one-offing different lease agreements or grants and aid or subsidizations.
Thank you.
So would we need to change if this passes, would we then need to change the policy of how that rent is, or sorry, those utilities are calculated, as Diana said, semi or annually, or because it's not in the policy now, is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley, the motion is to finalize the policy and bring it back. So we would add that in and bring it back.
Awesome, thank you.
Anything further? Councilor Elliott?
So based on number of participants, the gymnastics club is a for-profit. The curling club has a fair number of members. Yes, I
imagine
don't
so.
know, but, and then I'm going to the arts and craft, which is smaller. Sometimes with government funding, they give a base amount and then so much per capita over and above that. So I'm going to go the other way and say, okay, so if we did a base amount, we figured out the subsidy for one, what if could we change the subsidy for the second one? So could we say that the Arts and Crafts Center would be at 70% and the curling rink would be at 60% and actually itemize that at this point in time till we get, and then 3 years from now, figure it out again so that their relative increase is similar.
We can, absolutely, but then you're now picking individual organizations.
Yes, I know.
Right.
But the way the economy is now, we don't want to prohibit people from participating.
Mhm.
And if the increase is too high, it would probably be cost prohibitive to some groups. And we don't want to see that happen. And if we had the subsidy at different rates at this point in time, and maybe in 3 years, when there's a review, that would change.
Are you making an amendment?
I'll let Councillor Nielsen speak first.
I understand the need for consistency and the desire for that. But when your curling club increase goes up 10%, your precision gymnastics goes up 10%, and arts and crafts goes up 170%. There's something amiss in this process, in my mind. The question that I have is, what are we going to do if one or more of these groups says, no, thank you, we just have more space sitting idle? We turn the temperature down and we lock the door, and then we try and find another renter for that space. I don't know how you re-rent the curling rink. I don't know how you re-rent gymnastics at this point. You probably have a better chance of renting the Arts and Crafts Center, turning it into a dance studio or something, I don't know. But consistency, I've lost consistency at 10%, 10%, and 170%.
But that's when the grant and aid could come into play. And then it's still consistent.
But you're asking me to sign a lease based on maybe I can get some grant and aid.
Yep.
I would make an amendment. This could be in the body of the motion, using the total operational costs method at a subsidized rate of 60% for the Wetaskiwin Curling Club, 70% for the Wetaskiwin Arts and Crafts Society, and 20% for the nonprofit organization.
For profit.
I'm sorry, for profit. I'm leaving that the same. The only thing I'm doing is adding 60% for the Wetaskiwin Curling Club and 70% for the.
Amended by Councillor Elliott. So then what about the groups that are currently not paying anything, but now are going to be asked to pay 1,020 and 485 for space?
You're talking about the office people,
Okay.
the office spaces. I look for guidance from the rest of council. And I don't mean it to be a laughing matter because it's not. They've never paid before. And now we're asking them to pay, so.
Or vacate the space. Pay or vacate the space.
But if all of a sudden you have to pay $1,700 as minor hockey for an office at a 50% subsidy, that's a lot of money when you haven't been paying anything.
Counselor Alonso.
Thank you, sir. But if we're looking at it and we're dealing with the people that are already paying, they're seeing an increase. And now in some of the places where they haven't been paying yet, now all of a sudden they're seeing an increase, obviously. So if we're trying to stay consistent, that, you know, it's hard to do, but it's space owned by the city that is being used. And sometimes we just have to do it.
And they have never paid before. So they've been having free rent.
But then has some of the organizations been receiving a higher subsidy of rent then? If they've gone from 4,000 something to 7,000 something, or whatever the difference is. So, I mean, you can argue it both ways that they've been getting cheap rent, whether it was free or not. And maybe we look at your previous amendment that it's over a 3-year period for that increase. Anything further on the amendment? Councilor Billingsley.
Yeah, I'm not going to support the amendment as you alluded to earlier, consistency, and this takes it away.
We're back on screens again. For the question, those in favor? On the amendment, yeah. Opposed? Defeated. Councillor Eberly,
Thank you. I would like to make an amendment.
welcome to the party.
Hmm?
Welcome to the party.
Uh-huh. I move that we follow what the motion on the floor is, but at any, and you might need to help me work these words out because I'm still getting used to this, at any lease agreement, the rental is not increased of 50% of what, more than 50% of what they're already paying. Right? So if we were to talk, and the reason I am bringing this up specifically, if we look at it, I can see feasibly, whatever I'm trying to say, or if maybe it's 50% of the cost, but I can see groups being able to make a certain percentage of their budget to increase it. It is impossible to do the over 100% in that 1 year. So if we're able to work on something where they at least have time in these next 3 years to look at, they can start now planning what their rent is going to go up to. In those, do they need to move that? So that would also be with the office spaces, is if I'm looking at, I'm just going to look really quickly. Skating, if we had them at, they were a nonprofit, so they would be at 485. It would be no more than the 200 and change, whatever that 50% of that increase is. Does that make sense? 50% of the increase. If it's going to be more than twice there. If they are no more than 50% of what they're currently paying, if they're paying something, or 50% of the increase if they're paying nothing.
So if they're paying nothing, 50% of that is,
No, 50% of what that increase would be. So I'm looking at 50% here. So that would be, and that's where I'm seeing, so right now, the office space for curling is at nothing. If they were, and I think we're going to 60%, right? Because they would be nonprofit. So 50% of their increase would be, I can't do the math. Wayne, you're the
For
math
the
person.
skating club,
240.
for the skating club?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So they would pay 50% of their increase if they're currently paying zero.
Basically, not to exceed 50% of what they're paying. No, I heard it differently. I heard her saying, if I owe $2,000 and you're now moving me to 7,000, I can't pay more than 50% of what my 4,000 was, so I'd be paying 6, not the.
not
the
50% of the 7,000, but
Right.
50% of,
So not
the
to
increase.
exceed 50% of my existing rent. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and then for those that are paying nothing, 50% of the proposed increase.
So if they're already paying something, so curling is paying, or so let's go, arts and crafts is paying $36.92. We're proposing it to go to $74.75. So you're saying their new lease rate would be 50% of $74.75 or 50% of the increase?
50% of the increase.
for how long?
For the 3 years until?
For the 3 years. And then that, and where this reads into it beyond that, that becomes a different question. But right now, all of those groups are going to have, we're going to be able to provide these increases that are everything statistically equal across the board. But if there are increases that are unfeasible for that group, they have 3 years to decide whether or not they can make that increase, because some are really like there's no way the arts club is going to be able to afford that. We're going to lose them all together. I can see with the smaller groups where it's a few $100s here and there because they're not paying anything, it's possible. But that gives the art club, because it's coming down to this right now. And I think we really have to look at how we value arts and culture differently than how we value recreation. I want to give this group the opportunity to find out whether or not they can do it. And that's what it comes down to. The smaller groups, again, skating is very small. It's a small group that doesn't have a lot of money to throw around, a lot of people being part of their group. So it's giving the smaller groups the opportunity to make these decisions nonprofits are having to make right now, but it gives them some time. We could say 50% of the increase or 50% of their current lease, whichever is greater, because it would have to be greater, right? If I'm doing 50% of nothing. Because there's still, what's 3,000 of the increase?
On the arts and crafts club? On the arts and crafts, is that what you're talking about? Arts and crafts?
Yeah.
So I think Councillor Nielsen, so 170% increase to theirs. So they're looking at, if you go the 50% of the increase, $18.91 would be their increase.
Yeah.
If it's 50% of the new rate.
But then take that same calculation on the curling club. Their increase is what, $1,800? Are we going to cut that in half to 50% as well?
I think you started it off by saying if their lease rate doubled.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
it more than doubled.
So the curling club wouldn't be in there. The gymnastics wouldn't be in there because they didn't meet that quota. But the two other places that didn't pay anything before would see their new lease rate be 50% of what is being proposed now.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the three that would be affected would be the Wetaskiwin Arts and Crafts Center, the Wetaskiwin Minor Hockey Association office space, and the Wetaskiwin Skating Club office space.
Yeah.
So their new lease rate would be 50% of what is being proposed as the increase.
Yeah. So Karen, I think we need to put that in if the, please and thank you, if in the case that the leased rent has doubled, more than doubled what it is currently by more than 100%.
No, it'll be, so it makes it so that 50% of the increase or 50% of the proposed lease is what would.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the proposed lease rate. So because right now, currently, those two office spaces don't have a lease rate, so it'll be 50% of what's being proposed. No, 50%. So the only out of those three that are affected, 50% of the increase to the Arts and Crafts Center.
I'm writing down what I want to say. Okay.
If it's easier to type, Counselor Averly, then yeah, let me know.
I owe y'all lunch. Sorry.
Sorry. Can administration request for a 5-minute
Yes,
break
please.
while we sort this out? Thank you.
Karen, I think it reads okay.
Thank you, Council, for your patience. I appreciate it very much.
We went from 50 to 70. Wasn't it originally 50? Or 100?
Sorry, Dean, that was my math problems. So their rent was not raised by more than 100. It was rent. It was anybody who was raised by 70% or more. That was me saying the wrong wording at that time.
And your reasoning for 70 as a number?
To be perfectly honest, for 70 is I think that if we are, I could just say doubling it, but that was getting us into nobody else was being doubled, and 70% was a good number to give us some room. It
Okay.
works.
Okay.
It does not
Fair
change the
enough.
intent. Thank you.
Got time. sorry. What do you got? Let me just take my time here. Do we need to have something in this motion that speaks to into the policy about how the expenses will be calculated? That'll be something totally separate. Okay, then I'm good. Thank you.
So through the chair, Councillor Aberlin, so I'm assuming we only have. Well, that's pretty true. I was gonna say we only have one group that would be over 70%, but that's not true because some of the other office space would also be there. Okay, I'm good. Thank you. One quick one. I'll do my best. Yes, I would like to move that council directs administration to examine alternatives. Catch up. Okay, to examine alternatives to the core requirements to allow local businesses and contractors the opportunity to bid on work that the city will tender as part of the 2022 budget. Can I speak to that? Okay. No, I can't. Get to my office. Okay, thank you. So for those who are new to council, CORE that I spoke to is a occupational health and safety accreditation that verifies a fully implemented safety and health management system for the company. We in the city of Wetaskiwin have that as a requirement for contracted work. We have only a handful of businesses that I'm aware of in town that actually have CORE for a whole host of different reasons. And in previous discussions, it's been determined or we've been informed that not all communities have the same requirement that we do to have CORE. Some other communities have other safety, health management systems in place. Given that we have just recently added a pretty substantial amount of financial dollars to both operational and capital spending projects, I would like to see local businesses get an opportunity to bid by having administration look at other alternatives, not to exclude CORE, but CORE could still be one of them, but businesses that could give other verification that they have appropriate health and safety management systems in place. And I also put it down to the 2022 budget only, because I would see it as like a pilot where at the end of the year, if this got approved, Sue would come back and say, we did it the way you asked. Here's some of the problems we encountered, or here's how it worked well, or here's how I'd recommend we do it in the future. As I said earlier, when we were talking about budget, we've been told by economic development that growth comes from within existing businesses in our community. And I would like to give those businesses an opportunity, not to get the work, but to at least bid for the work. And if they are the successful bid, then be awarded the tender, providing they had an approved, recommended health and safety management system in place. End quote.
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, we might need to look at the 2023 because a lot of the tenders have gone out already. And the alternatives to core are ISO, which are very labor intensive. Like the contractors are going to need time to come up with an alternative.
So are you saying there's only 2 accredited safety systems?
Well, the other option council has is letting them come under our core, which means that we need a full-time safety person to monitor them. There's ISO and there's core.
But I thought you introduced us to one some time ago that had all the core safety stuff and was overseeing the core portion. Staff member,
Well, yeah, she does internal safety,
which is coming under our banner, isn't that what you're saying?
right? But she doesn't monitor each department. She tells the managers what they have to do to make sure that their department is safe. And then she does our audit. She does, like she's looking at all of our documentation and that sort of stuff and updating our policies. If we were to have a person dedicated to these contractors, she doesn't have the time. She'd have to choose.
So are you saying every other community is either requiring people to have core or ISO? Every other community?
Or they take the risk on themselves. Yes.
And what does that mean? Take the risk on themselves?
If a contractor gets hurt, we're prime. So RWCB, they would claim under RWCB if they got hurt. We would have to monitor their safety programs. Look at their policies, procedures. We would have to monitor their sites to make sure that their staff are following their policies or ours. It can be done. I just don't know that we could do it for 2022.
So is not having core an issue in our community? And if it is, why? Like, are we not getting bids from local contractors because they don't have core? And if they don't have core, what's holding them back from getting core? Like, in other words, what's the root of I understand what you're saying, because we want more dollars being kept locally, and I hard to argue that. But what I don't understand in this is why aren't they going to get core?
So I've talked to 3 local business people. One is time to do all that training. One is cost in their mind. And the other is that there's other alternatives that have worked. All the people that I've talked to work in all the communities around us, but don't work for us. So they work in Pinoka, they work in Beaumont, they work in Camrose, they work in Leduc. And they're not required to have core. But so that's what I'm hearing from local contractors. I can't even bid in my own community without having to take on additional expense and time. But I can bid on jobs outside.
So you had said that some of these tenders have already gone out on the 2022 budget as well?
So then our communities like Camrose, Beaumont, what are the other ones that Councilor Nielsen had listed? They're running or allowing contractors to run under their WCB?
I don't believe they are. I believe either those contractors are bidding as a sub or they're not telling the truth, because I know for a fact Leduc and Camrose both have core requirements. I've
But they
talked to them.
wouldn't need to have core if they were subcontracted by
Correct.
somebody else.
If the prime contractor has core, they could go under them. And I should point out that I have offered multiple times to anyone in the community. I was a certified AMSA auditor. I have developed health and safety programs on my own time. I would develop their programs and train their staff for them.
You've said that for a number of years.
Yeah, and I've never had one person take me up on it.
So what would be, wrong choice of words, wrong. If you added ISO, like you had to have core or ISO or whatever, like, I guess all I'm on doing is trying to create an opportunity for the local guys to bid. And we've never spent, as long as I've been on council, really big bucks on capital in terms of the kind of dollars we put into this year's budget. And so I think the local people are saying, well, you know, it's only this little job here and this little job here. The magnitude of this has changed somewhat considerably through this budget. So now there's some really serious coin on the table. And I would like to see us, again, not necessarily award the tenders, but at least give them the opportunity to compete. And I don't know how many of them might have ISO, but not core, or what. I can't speak to that because that's outside my realm.
We could easily add ISO, but if they don't have core,
Probably
it's
don't.
just as much work. It's just a different standard. ISO is good across the country. And core is individual to each province.
And for them to come under our WCB, what are the risk factors there? So like you mentioned, injuries to employees.
Yeah, so it would reflect on our WCB with any of their injuries. It would become our responsibility to monitor and make sure that they're doing their health and safety program. And I used the example previously of a person who had died on the site, and the city, that would then be our responsibility. So we would be sued. It would go on our WCB record as having a death. The investigation, OH&S would find us solely responsible because we would be prime. So that's the extreme. But even if somebody got injured on one of those sites, they would be on our WCB forever potentially.
And do we have any knowledge of data about injuries on jobs in the city?
Our own
No,
injuries?
No, like, so we hire a contractor who comes in from Innisfail and he does work. Are we ever apprised of an accident or an injury by their company while working for us?
They're supposed to submit the reports to us. That doesn't mean it always happens.
And so for those who have submitted reports, what kind of injury rate do we have? So
We
what is
don't,
it- what
we
is the-
don't, because it's under theirs. So they still have to, even if they have core, they have to submit it to us so that we know what happened,
No, I understood.
but it goes under theirs.
Right. So what is the rate of incidents reported to us?
I don't have that data. I'd have to find out.
And I guess the reason I asked the question is, if it's negligible, how big a risk are we taking? And if it's not negligible, then I understand where you're coming from. I don't have any data that would say, you know, we're taking on a 80% greater risk by having under our WCB, or a 1% risk. I just believe $4 or $5 million in our community would do a wealth of good for our community. That's all.
And I can look into it. I'm just saying it. If the intent is to give them opportunity to bid on our projects this year, we've already put a lot of them out with that caveat that if they were not approved, they would be canceled, because we wanted to hit that early in the year mark with the majority of them.
But if this motion were to pass, the potential is for the remaining tenders to go out.
Yes.
We could change that requirement.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anything further? So I don't support the motion. Even if it is a 1% risk, all it takes is one accident to happen by a contractor under our WCB or using us as prime, that we then have to, we're then responsible for either a life-changing injury or a death. And I think that having core in place for the municipality to protect it is first and foremost. And I've sat in council chambers for years and have heard Sue offer to go through core and help them get through and get certified. And if, while I would love to see local businesses be able to bid on work here in town, if they're not also taking the initiative to be able to bid on work in town, knowing what the expectations are, then you can lead a horse to water. At some point, they have to take the initiative themselves as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree that there's just too much risk. My concern, what happens if we bring in a contractor to go fix something? Ceiling fan, whatever. Do they have to have core? And how do we make sure that they have it? Is there an approved list? And if it's emergency, what happens if they don't?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley, we do have pre-qualified contractors and we do have lists and they have to respond within a certain time and they all have core.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So we never called anybody in that has not had core.
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, I cannot say that. I have actually caught departments in the past calling in people who did not have safety programs and we shut them down as soon as I found out about it.
Thank you.
Anything further? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Opposed? Defeated. Counselor Blatz.
I move to adjourn.
Moved by Counselor Blatz. Those in favor? Carried unanimously. We will reconvene at 2:30 for budget.
Thanks. What do you have for lunch?